was selected as the Bioeconomy Success Story Showcase for Finland, and part of that was similar to Carberry, how they are adding value to dairy side streams, but in a completely different way to what Carberry are doing, as well as their success as a dairy producer. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Enda, Sean and Michael visited Carberry as COOPID ambassadors from Ireland to get an in-depth view of what's taking place there, and so I'll welcome them to comment at the end of the just a brief introduction. And sorry, now the slides have paused on me. There we go. Okay, so Valio is responsible for processing 80% of Finnish milk, which is huge. They have 4,000 farmer members, and that they're comprised of 13 cooperatives. So it's a substantial operation. They've got 12 production facilities in Finland alone, and they're producing dairy, but also jam and juice. And they have some other processing facilities in Estonia and Sweden, as well as overseas in China and the US. And their main business is food production, as you might imagine, being a dairy cooperative. So, you know, in addition to their butter and cheese, they're also branching out into high protein snacks and plant-based dairy substitutes. So they're covering a range of different food product areas, and they're responsible for 25% of Finland's food exports, which is, again, just massive capacity. But they have a secondary business strategy, which is around circulating side streams in order to add value to what might otherwise be waste. So I suppose the main raw materials will be coming directly from farms themselves, manure and feed waste. And then they're also taking in side streams from other types of farmers, like vegetable farmers, as well as from food processing plants. And that's being used to create biogas predominantly. So this would be one of their main side stream utilization approaches. And that biogas is being used for electricity, for heat, but also for fuel, for milk collection trucks, as well as for private cars. The biodigestate then from that biogas can be spread on fields as fertilizer, which, you know, is displacing chemical fertilizer for the production of further feed and forage for the dairy farms. So similar to what Enda described, it's a circular approach, and that would be a strong part of Valio's business model. Valio also has big ambition in relation to reducing carbon emissions and reducing the carbon footprint of dairy, and they call this Towards Carbon Neutral Milk 2035. So as you might imagine, the aim is to bring milk's carbon footprint down to zero within Valio's dairy farms by 2035. So we can see that in 2020, their total emissions were 3.24 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Most of that happening on farms. An additional 35% happen in relation to soil carbon emissions. And as the guys will tell you, they do have quite a lot of peaty soil in use in that area. So that will be contributing to that big fraction of soil carbon emissions. And then about 10% is related to energy usage in the processing plants, logistics, and other value chain emissions, like, for example, packaging. So they have an action strategy. You can see in the left column, it's mostly related to energy production and energy efficiency. And then the 4 squares on the right are really related to farm emissions, carbon sequestration on farms, and implementation of new emission reduction technologies, which go right across the supply chain. They also have this Carbo Farm calculator, which monitors the carbon emissions of farms that are part of Valio and helps them to reduce their CO2 emissions. So that'll be similar actually to what Ireland's been doing in the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme with Origin Green. In fact, the Carbon Trust is behind the carbon monitoring of the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme as well. So it's interesting to see the similarities there between how Finland and Ireland are addressing carbon reduction in dairy production. As said already, circularity is a really core part of their business model. And if we take the Vuornma dairy farm example, they're taking manure and feed waste from the farm, and they're using that as raw material from biogas production, but they're also taking in side streams from others in the food sector, particularly in relation to vegetables from local vegetable farmers that might otherwise be wasted, and peeling waste from processing companies. So that biogas then can be used to produce electricity for the farms, but also to displace fossil fuels in the logistics of milk collection for Valio, and sold by the farmers for private vehicles within the local area. And that's really not a negligible income stream. In the information that Valio provided to us, one of the farmers from Vuornma said that was 10 to 15% of their turnover. So a really important part of the farm income now is coming from that biogas production and sale as fuel for cars. In addition then to addressing food waste and adding value to side streams of dairy production, the biogas production is helping to address emissions through reducing manure storage. So in other words, the slurry is stored for shorter periods of time because it's being used in the biogas production facilities. It's also helping to displace chemical fertilizer use because the digestate from the biogas production can be used on the fields. And as I mentioned already, it can be used for electricity and heat on the farms as well. So reducing demand for fossil energy there. I'll just go back to that. And so just to give you a look at how much biogas is being used by Valio at the moment, and I suppose what their level of ambition is. They have a total of 71 milk trucks, and that kind of farm scale biogas that I gave you the example of in Vuornma has a 1 to 5 gigawatt hour production capacity, and produces compressed biogas, which is suitable for light trucks and cars. But in order to displace fossil fuel use for their heavier milk trucks and also sell it for heavy goods vehicles in general, they need to be producing liquefied biogas, which requires centralized biogas production, so big biogas plants, in other words. At the moment, 4 of their milk trucks are taking liquefied biogas, whereas they have 2 trucks, a milk truck and a product distribution truck that's taken the compressed biogas, which is produced at farm level. So considering that they have another 69 trucks that would require liquefied biogas, and there's quite a clear need to produce a kind of a hybrid system. It can't be all farm-based biogas, but it also needs to have those kind of centralized units, which I think is interesting to look at from an Irish perspective, that so far those centralized units, I suppose, have been what's mostly been examined, but the farm-based biogas is definitely of interest for the capacity to address emissions, but also add more value for farmers. Valio have highlighted some of the key characteristics that they think have contributed to their success. That includes their valorization of manure and feed waste and food industry side streams, mostly for the production of bioenergy. And that's part of the circular approach, upgrading biogas to biofuel for heavy transport, like I just described, circulating nutrients and carbon back to the soil. Their cooperative business approach, they feel, has been a key part of their success, and government financial support for biogas production has been an important part of that as well. So with that in mind, Sean, Enda and Michael, it would be really great to hear from you what you think, I suppose, the success factors for Valio were from your own observations there. And maybe, Sean, you might start with what you feel you took away as the main success factors from your visit.
Well, what I seen from that was that the engineering part of it was set up first in 2 containers, and it was built in the factory, and it was transported on a plinth on wherever the site was required, which made a big difference. Like, it made life very easy for them and for the farmer. He didn't have to worry about people around the place or anything like that. So it was perfect for that setup. Yeah.
You're on mute, Tracy.
Again.
Thanks, Sean. Enda, and Michael, do you have anything to add from what you saw from the operations in Valio?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, for me, I think what was interesting was just in Finland, it's very much a barn system, Tracy. So the cattle are in, effectively, the cows, certainly the dairy cows, are in 365 days of the year. So I suppose they have a much bigger capability of I suppose harvesting manure, and I suppose obviously then you can produce biogas from that. So that's a big difference, I suppose, to Ireland, where the cow is out typically certainly close on 300 days of the year. So that was a big one for me. I thought it was interesting as well, I suppose, the amount of grass they were able to grow actually in those peak summer months, June, July, because they have a lot more sunlight, because they're that far north, especially up around the Ulu region. That was interesting. And something I found very interesting actually was, because we get quite a few inquiries about soya. There's no soya being used in Finland. Oats are a big part of the concentrate mix there. And I just thought it was very interesting to see that there was no oats being used there, and there was the lads will testify, I suppose, the cows were pretty good high yielders, lads, weren't they? They were around, you know, averaging 10,000 litres per year. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, and yeah, very interesting points there, to like in terms of comparison with the Irish system. Michael,
Yeah,
what about yourself?
Yes, I found it very interesting. And they alluded to it there to then. Did it actually ask the question after this farmer that's selling the gas there? He's able to set the price himself. So like that's, I'm not saying he's going to go and shoot the price away up, but he can regulate it to his need. The other one is a question I asked him after was about the grass. I always thought it was dry grass that went into these plants, but apparently the wetter is more manageable. And what I said was, the younger the grass, the better. And the quotation they used is young grass, more gas. Another thing that was there was another plant that we were on that it cost in the region of 700,000 to build it. They were his figures. And out of that, he got 50% government aid. And I suppose one of the things I did take from it, like you talked there about trucks, that when we were there, the truck actually pulled up and refueled. And I spoke to the driver, and what he said was that he can do 400 kilometers, I think, on the tank of gas. You know, he had a 20-ton truck, rigid, but the roads are level at that. The truck was about 400 horsepower. Now, what I took away from it, like if we were to do that in Ireland, the first thing is the slurry would have to go to it have to be in a central location, because they have all the slurry, because they have cattle inside all the time, all the year round. whereas we only produce most of the slurry in about 5 months of the year. And what we would produce in the time outside of that would be small. So like there is benefits. Whether it could work in the same scale, I'm not sure. And the other thing I thought used a lot of grass silage, but no, there's very little grass silage actually being used, because that's a question I often get asked is, what about the animals, the feed? And the way I'll answer that is, I think the more we should be thinking about is, would we have enough slurry for it? Because the slurry is 7,000 to 8,000 cubic meters per year. So like there's a lot in it, and there's a lot more that we can learn from it.
How would their herd sizes compare to what you'd have seen in West Cork and in Kerry?
Well, the amount of cows on the 2 farms we were on was 180 cows plus the replacements. That's
Yeah, and I think that was pretty average, Michael, talking to the Valio guys, that was pretty standard. Yeah.
And just to emphasize that they're inside all the year round, which they have producing slurry for that from those.
And the other interesting part as well, Tracy, and that is, so like that's typically twice as big as an Irish herd on average. But the other thing I found interesting, lads, was the acreage. Like the last guy certainly had, gosh, was it something like 300 hectares he had? Which would be, you know, that would put the standard dairy farm here in the Halfpenny place, like the average guy here is about 100 acres. So that's up at 800-900 acres. So I suppose nitrates is a big discussion point here at the moment, Tracy, in terms of banding, etc. That there's no impact for those guys when they have that kind of platform to work off of.
Yeah, their stocking rates are essentially very low, like even though
1.6 is their stocking rate.
1.6,
Yeah.
So like the aim here is pretty much double, isn't it? Like in terms of cross use efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they did say also that their milk solids was very high, but so with their milk yields, that was contributing to the very high solids, the kgs of fat and protein. But their yield is around 10,000 litres, like, which would bring that away up, like.
Yeah.
So in relation to the emissions profile, do you think that the year-round housing system, or almost year-round housing system, contributes to the demand for heat, for electricity, all of that? Like, would you see a big difference between the on-farm emissions in Finland compared to here?
It's a good question, Tracy. I mean, I suppose with the indoor system, I think AD is very complementary with it, because you are obviously generating all that slurry, and they obviously grow quite a good bit of their own tillage with that as well. So I think it's very complementary. It's kind of hard to know, I suppose, because you touched on the peat piece. Like they certainly have more peaty soils, I think, up there than we would have typically in Ireland. Again, depending on where you are. So again, that would probably lend itself to a higher emissions profile. I didn't see any kind of on-farm carbon footprints, to be honest, Tracy. So hard to know. One other thing just went to my head, I suppose, is they have a lot of timber biomass. So I suppose again, that would probably help in terms of sequestration. That probably could offset a lot of the peaty soil piece. So yeah, I didn't see any individual footprints, now, to be honest.
Yeah. As I said, with like those numbers, it's hard to make a judgment call. Yeah. And just to remind our participants, if you have any questions as well for Carmen, please drop them in the chat. And I see one there actually from Natalia, who would like to know from the panelists what they think about circular bioeconomy's advancements on dairy farms and future direction. So yeah, what's lacking? What are the challenges at the moment for expanding a circular bioeconomy approach here in Ireland?
I think one of the first ones is a lot of the farms in Ireland, they're very scattered, and to get slurry, you have to transport the slurry to a central location in order to have enough slurry to keep the biodigester going all the time. So that vehicles have to be road, so it has to be a central location, and you must have storage on the location. The other one would be probably planning in Ireland anyway.
And what do you mean by that, Michael, with planning?
Well, in comparison to up in Finland, like planning seems to be way easier to get than what would be in Ireland. Like you'd be at least minimum of 3 months with planning. That's all going well with everything, because you have to think about it like that. You must be away a bit from houses in order to give them, so they can't, so there's no smells. Even though I was on a digester plant here in Ireland, up in Limerick, and you wouldn't even know till the.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, it can seem like the planning process doesn't help us accelerate, certainly. And Carmen, I know that you know, drew our attention to the huge amount of slurry that's available in the country from the Inform Bio project. Do you think that the regional dispersal of that suggests any better locations for centralized biogas production?
Yeah, definitely. If we will be able to centralize every slurry production into 1 or 2 locations per county, that would be better to create these anaerobic digestions industries, because at the moment I believe there's so little amount of slurry goes to anaerobic digestion because of these main reasons. So probably this is an improvement we need to study.
From a farmer's perspective, is biodigestate an attractive fertilizer substitute compared to taking your own slurry and spreading it? You know, is biodigestate really an attractive proposition? Sean and Michael.
Same as urea. It's the same as urea, Tracy. There's no P's and K's in it, which when you're growing silage takes 100 units of K for silage and about 40 units of P. Like, so you have to buy those then afterwards. Like, that's a problem. You'll have enough urea, right, from it, but that would be a problem, I see.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
that has to be replaced.
Yeah, I think that actually the units of nitrogen in it is around 38 units of nitrogen in what was tested on and no, I think that it would be a benefit, but we still need to go out with P's and K's, like, because you must keep the side, like, you must, if you're going to keep going out with just straight nitrogen, it's not going to grow the grass eventually, like, and you're going to run into a problem. So you still need P's and K's, like, to go out.
It's all just one other point, sorry, Tracy. It's also meant to be more bioavailable than certainly standard slurry and other chemical fertilizers. So I think that's another potential benefit.
And in relation to what you saw when you were on, especially those 2 farms, do you think that the biogas sale for private cars has any, I suppose, potential for Ireland, either in relation to dairy farms or food processors cycling nutrients from, like, food waste into anaerobic digestion?
Well,
Might
I
suit contractors would be the best bet, I'd say, because you convert their tractors for it, or they'd buy tractors for that. But I'd say the ordinary dairy farmer wouldn't have enough use for it. I could just wait look at it.
Yeah, I think you want fair scale, Tracy, for that, really. Like, I suppose I think we got to look at the context maybe small bit here as well. Like, let's spin. I suppose obviously the whole Ukraine thing had kind of blown up as well when we were there, and I suppose there was a whole kind of self-sufficiency thinking. I think certainly within the Finns, I picked up on it. So there was a big push, I suppose, to anything that bought Russian gas really was kind of is part of the mindset. So I think that's maybe why there was a big uptake, because he'd seen a huge uptake, hadn't he, lads?
Yeah.
Kind of even gone from like the previous 3 months. So, but like you'd see them in Germany as well, to be fair. So I think, yeah, potentially, yeah. But I think I agree with Sean. I think you'd need a fair bit of scale to see that happen.